What's up, book lovers? Welcome to Book Seal. Today, we're diving into the book, The Art of Spending Money by Morgan Housel. All right, let's get started. Chapter 1. All behavior makes sense with enough information. Someone once told me money is basically a mirror. It shows you things you didn't know you were carrying. And for some reason, that line hit me harder on a Tuesday morning than any self-help quote ever has. Because think about it for a second. Most of the choices we make with money, the weird ones, the impulsive ones, the quiet ones, they don't come out of nowhere. There's always a story underneath, a reason, a scar, a memory, something we rarely talk about but always feel. I had this moment a while back where I watched a friend spend way too much on a brand new phone. Not a cheap upgrade. I'm talking, this thing costs more than my first car kind of phone. And I could feel that tiny voice in my head judging him. You know that voice. The one that thinks it's smarter than everyone else. But then he said something while peeling the sticker off the screen. He said, "Man, when I was a kid, my family shared one old phone. I used to stand in line for my turn. So now, I don't stand in line for phones anymore." And suddenly it made sense. He wasn't showing off. He was healing something. That's the wild part. We think people spend for the reason they tell us, but most people spend for the reason they never say out loud. It's almost funny, isn't it? You see someone splurging on designer shoes, and your brain jumps straight to, they're trying to impress someone. But maybe those shoes are their reminder that they're not stuck where they used to be. Maybe it's a quiet victory you know nothing about. Or someone who refuses to spend $1 unless there's a coupon. Maybe they grew up in a home where every bill came with tension, and saving money feels like breathing room. There's always a why behind a wallet. We're so quick to label someone as careless or cheap or obsessed with status. But you zoom out even a little, and you realize everyone's financial behavior is just the surface layer of something older, softer, more human. And if we're being real for a moment, we all have that one money habit we don't fully understand either. That one thing we do automatically. Hoarding, overspending, never upgrading anything, buying things just in case. Avoiding purchases that might actually make life easier. And if you trace the thread far enough, it usually leads to a moment you didn't know was shaping you. There's this quiet relief that comes when you stop judging yourself for the way you spend. Not in a reckless, do whatever you want way. More like recognizing that your choices aren't random. They're fingerprints of the life you've lived. And once you see that, you don't get stuck in guilt or shame. You get curious. Curiosity is where change starts. Not discipline, not budgeting apps, not lectures about compound interest. Just simple curiosity. Why do I do this? And the second you ask that question honestly without beating yourself up, you unlock something. You get a little closer to spending money in ways that feel aligned instead of automatic. Funny how understanding yourself is the real investment. Chapter 2. The Happiest People I Know. I've noticed something strange about the happiest people in my life. They never look like the ones you expect. They're not the loudest. They're not the richest. They're not the ones posting sunsets and gratitude captions every other day. They're the ones who move through life with this quiet ease, like they're not fighting themselves anymore. There's a guy I know who lives this way. Not a guru, not a millionaire. Just a regular guy with a beat-up truck that somehow never dies. One afternoon we were sitting on his porch, and he said something that stayed with me. He said, "I don't need much to be good, and that's what keeps me good." I laughed at first because it sounded too simple. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like he was describing a superpower. Most of us grow up chasing something bigger. More money, more status, more proof that we're enough. But the happiest people, somehow, stop sprinting. They figure out that satisfaction doesn't show up after a specific dollar amount. It shows up when you stop treating life like a scoreboard. I think happiness is less about the things we get and more about the weight we put down. There's this woman I met at a workshop once. She had this relaxed confidence about her, like she wasn't rushing to impress anyone. During lunch, someone asked her what she did for a living. She smiled and said, "Enough." And you could see the confusion ripple through the room. Enough? What does that even mean? She explained that she works part-time, lives simply, and chooses her days carefully. And the way she talked about her life, it sounded like she'd hacked the system. She wasn't chasing happiness. She was shaping it. That's the pattern with these people. They're not allergic to ambition. They're just very skilled at knowing when to stop. They spend money on things that add life, not noise. And they aren't constantly trying to outdo their past selves or match someone else's highlight reel. There's something else I've noticed too. The happiest people don't measure success in impressive purchases. They measure it in peace. They know exactly what drains them, and they're not afraid to walk away from it. And they know what lifts them up, and they guard it like a treasure. It might be a hobby no one understands, a routine that looks boring on paper, a quiet home, a small circle, but to them, it's enough. And here's the unexpected part that hits different. Happy people are not perfect with money. They overspend sometimes. They make mistakes. They have regrets. But they don't let those moments define them. They don't get trapped in guilt loops. They adjust. They forgive themselves. They move forward without dragging shame like it's luggage. There's a subtle freedom in not needing everything to be optimized. At some point, you realize happiness isn't a finish line you rush toward. It's the space you create when you stop trying to live someone else's version of a good life. And the wild part is, most of the time, that space costs far less than you think. Chapter 3. Everything you don't see. It's funny how the most important parts of a person's financial life are usually the parts you never notice, the quiet choices, the invisible sacrifices, the stuff no one claps for. We tend to look at someone's lifestyle and assume we understand the whole story. But money has this way of hiding the truth in the background, like the backstage crew keeping the show running while the spotlight hits someone else. I remember watching a coworker years ago who always looked put together. Clean sneakers, smooth schedule, calm energy, no matter what chaos we were all swimming in. For months, everyone assumed he had some secret cushion, family money, big savings, who knows. One day, over coffee, he mentioned he'd been paying off medical debt for his parents for almost a decade. And suddenly, nothing about him meant what we thought it meant. His calm wasn't comfort, it was discipline. The kind of discipline you build when you've had no choice but to grow up early. And it made me realize something uncomfortable but true. Most people's financial lives make sense only when you see what they're carrying in the dark. We assume the guy with the luxury car must be successful. Maybe he is. Or maybe he's drowning in payments and losing sleep every night. We assume the woman living in a small apartment is struggling. Maybe she's actually building quiet wealth and choosing peace over pressure. People don't advertise the details that matter. They show the parts that feel safe. The rest sits underneath, shaping every decision they make. And if we're being honest, we all have invisible stuff shaping us too. The things that influence how we treat money or how we fear money, without us ever saying it out loud. That moment when you opened the fridge as a kid and saw it almost empty. The bill your family whispered about. The time you watched someone you love get embarrassed because they couldn't afford something. The silent promise you made to yourself that day. Those moments build instincts. Instincts build habits. And habits build lives. Sometimes the things you don't see are the most responsible choices. Like the friend who declines every Friday night outing, not because he's boring, but because he's trying to save enough to move his family to a safer neighborhood. Or the woman who never upgrades her car, not out of frugality, but because she's stacking money quietly to retire early. It's so easy to misread people when we only look at surface-level spending. Even the happiest financial lives have shadows. Stress that's hidden well, fear that's disguised as confidence, choices that look simple from the outside but are heavy from the inside. There was a moment recently where I caught myself judging someone's financial decision. Nothing harsh, just that little internal eyebrow raise we all do sometimes. And then I paused. It hit me that I had no idea what chapter of their story they were in. Maybe the decision wasn't about money at all. Maybe it was about safety, or pride, or healing, or responsibility. That pause shifted something in me. Money isn't just about what people buy. It's about what they protect, what they avoid, what they dream about quietly, what they're terrified of repeating. And most of that lives in the spaces you never see. Chapter 4. The most valuable financial asset is not needing to impress anyone. There's a strange kind of freedom that shows up the moment you stop performing for people who aren't even paying attention. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. It slips in quietly, like taking a deep breath you didn't know you were holding. And once it lands, your whole relationship with money shifts. I saw this play out with someone I knew in college. Back then, he was the guy who always looked like he'd stepped out of a music video. New clothes every week, fancy headphones, the whole curated persona. Everyone assumed he was loaded. Years later, when we reconnected, the first thing he said was, "Man, I was broke the entire time. He laughed, but there was this softness in his eyes. I wasted so much money trying to look like I wasn't struggling. That line stuck with me because it's painfully common. We spend money trying to prove something, and half the time, the people we're trying to impress don't even notice. Or worse, they notice and forget in 5 seconds. There's this moment in life, sometimes early, sometimes late, where you finally get tired. Not tired in a defeated way. Tired in a "why am I doing all this" way. The kind of tired that becomes honest. And honesty is expensive because it forces you to let go of the pretty version of yourself you think the world prefers. But that's where the real asset sits. Not in the bank, in the mindset. I once watched someone give up a flashy apartment to move into a smaller, quieter place. People whispered. They assumed something went wrong. But when you talked to him, he sounded happier than ever. He said the old place wasn't a home, it was a stage. Every room felt like it needed an audience. The new place just felt like his life, not his resume. That's the hidden power of not needing to impress anyone. Your money gets to serve you instead of your image. And something else happens too. You start seeing the world differently. You notice how many people are stuck in financial stress because they're chasing applause they don't actually need. You see people buying things they don't even enjoy. You see the pressure behind the polished photos. It becomes almost impossible not to feel compassion. You realize everyone is just trying to feel enough. There's a small twist in all this. The moment you stop trying to impress people, you actually become more impressive. Not in the flashy way, in the calm, grounded, unshakable way. The kind of presence that makes people think, I want to feel what they feel. Because someone who isn't playing the game anymore has a different kind of glow. They choose things because they genuinely want them. They spend without fear. They save without shame. They're not chasing validation like it's oxygen. And here's the part that hits quietly but deeply. The less you need others to approve of how you live, the more room you have to build a life that actually fits you. That's when money becomes powerful, not loud, not impressive, just deeply yours. Chapter 5. What makes you happy? Happiness is strange. You think you know what will bring it, and then life taps you on the shoulder and says, try again. It's almost funny how often we chase things that look good from a distance but feel empty when we finally hold them. I keep thinking about this one evening when a friend invited me to his new place. He'd been dreaming about this apartment for years. High floor, big windows, the whole glossy magazine vibe. The moment I walked in, everything looked perfect. But he didn't. He looked tired. Not long day tired. More like, I'm not sure this is doing what I hoped tired. We sat on the couch, and after a long silence, he said, I thought this would make me feel different. That one sentence carried so much weight. Because we've all been there. You chase something with your whole chest, believing it's the missing piece, only to realize the feeling you were hoping for didn't come with the purchase. And that's the slippery part. Real happiness is rarely in the things we imagine. It shows up in the smaller corners of life, the moments that never make it onto anyone's vision board. There's someone I know who bikes every morning before sunrise. Nothing glamorous about it. No fancy gear, no audience. Just him, the road, and the sound of wind. When I asked why he wakes up at such an impossible hour, he shrugged and said, it makes my head feel clear, simple, uncomplicated, and more real than half the things we try to impress ourselves with. Sometimes the stuff that truly makes us happy looks boring from the outside. Quiet mornings, warm food, people who get you, a routine that grounds you, laughing at something silly at the end of a long day, the smell of rain on a day you don't have anywhere to be. But we forget that because the world keeps flashing bigger. Louder options in front of us telling us happiness is a limited edition drop you have to buy before it sells out. It's easy to fall for that. It's even easier to confuse desire with delight. But they're not the same thing. There was this moment recently where I caught myself scrolling through things I didn't even want. It's like my brain was shopping for a feeling, not an item. And that's when it hit me. Happiness doesn't usually come from adding more. It comes from noticing what already feels good and giving it more space. Here's the twist that sneaks up on you. The things that truly make you happy aren't loud. And because they're not loud, you overlook them. You forget the way a calm evening feels until you lose it. You forget how grounding a simple routine can be until life gets chaotic. You forget how energizing a good conversation is until you've had too many shallow ones. Money helps, of course. Life is easier when your basics are covered. But beyond that point, happiness stops being a spending question. and starts becoming an awareness question. What actually lifts your spirit? What makes your shoulders drop? What makes time feel slower in a good way? The moment you start paying attention to those answers, not the marketed ones, not the glamorous ones, the real ones, your financial choices begin to make sense. You stop chasing every shiny thing. You stop expecting purchases to fix emotional gaps. You start choosing a life that feels lighter instead of one that only looks impressive on the surface. And that's when you get a little closer to money serving happiness instead of pretending to be it. Chapter 6. The Rich and the Wealthy. There's a moment in life when you realize rich and wealthy are not the same thing. They look similar from a distance, but up close, they feel completely different. One is loud. One is quiet. One tries to convince the world. The other doesn't need to. I learned this from two people who never met each other, but their lives told the same story in opposite directions. The first was someone who had all the signs of being rich. Big house, shiny car, the kind of wardrobe that makes strangers assume you have your life together. Whenever he walked into a room, you could almost feel the performance. Not in a bad way, just in a way that made it obvious how much energy he spent looking the part. And for a while, he held it all together. The image, the lifestyle, the unspoken pressure to maintain it. Then one day, almost quietly, everything cracked. He admitted he'd been drowning in credit, juggling payments, and living in a constant state of financial panic. His life looked successful. His bank account felt like a storm. And then there was someone else. Someone whose life didn't look impressive at all. Old clothes, simple home, modest routines. But when you talked to him, there was this calmness, like his mind wasn't fighting with his reality. One day he mentioned, almost casually, that he could stop working tomorrow and still be okay for years. He wasn't showing off. It wasn't a flex. It was just his truth. No spotlight, no performance. Just quiet stability. That's when it hit me. Rich is a look. Wealthy is a feeling. Rich is the picture. Wealthy is the foundation beneath it. And it's wild how often we get them mixed up. We chase the image because it's visible, but the things that actually make you feel stable, the savings, the margin, the freedom, the peace, those things stay hidden. No one can see them in a selfie. No one compliments you for owning less stress than your neighbor. There's a moment, somewhere along the way, where you realize the whole game is backward. We admire the people who spend the most and forget to admire the people who worry the least. The truly wealthy people I've met have this softness in the way they make decisions. They're not trying to one-up anyone. They're not battling insecurity. Their choices are grounded, not reactive. When something breaks, they don't panic. When something tempting goes on sale, they don't lose their minds. Their money feels like a seatbelt instead of a scoreboard. And maybe the most surprising part, wealthy people aren't always frugal in the stereotypical way. It's not about clipping coupons or refusing to buy decent coffee. It's about intention. They know what matters to them, and they spend there without guilt. And they ignore everything else. It's like they've edited their lives down to the essentials that make them feel alive. There's a quiet power in that, a kind of emotional stability money alone can't buy. At some point, you realize you don't want to be the person who looks rich but feels cornered. You want to be the one who feels wealthy, even on the days you don't look impressive at all. Because the truth is simple. Rich fills the room. Wealth fills your life. Chapter 7. Utility versus status. There's this tiny moment that happens before almost every purchase, a split second where your mind decides whether you're buying something for its life value or for its social value. Most people miss that moment completely. It's quick, quiet, almost invisible. But once you learn to notice it, you start seeing your entire financial life through a different lens. I had this realization at a store once, standing in front of two jackets that looked almost identical. One was simple and sturdy. The other had a tiny logo on the sleeve that somehow made it $100 more. And here's the funny part, I caught myself reaching for the expensive one even though I didn't actually like it more. That moment wasn't about warmth. It was about wanting other people to notice something they would forget in 3 seconds. I put it back, but the thought stayed with me longer than it should have. Status is sneaky like that. It walks beside you, whispering, "Get the one people will see." Utility whispers, "Get the one that actually matters." Most of the time, we don't even realize which voice we're listening to. I know someone who buys the plainest phone on the shelf every few years. No bells, no whistles, just something that works. When I asked him why, he said, "I don't want my stuff to speak louder than I do." That line hit harder than I expected, because for a lot of people, their purchases do the talking. The watch says confidence. The shoes say success. The car says stability, even if none of it feels true inside. But utility speaks a different language. It says, "I know what I need." It says, "My life matters more than my image." It doesn't shout. It doesn't perform. It just functions and frees you. There was a moment a while back when a friend upgraded his entire kitchen. New appliances, designer everything, the whole catalog look, and he didn't cook, not even a little. I don't think he sliced a single onion that whole year. When I teased him about it, he smiled in that way people smile when they know you've hit the truth. He said, "I bought the kitchen I thought successful people had." That confession wasn't embarrassing. It was honest. A lot of us have done versions of the same thing without saying it out loud. Utility is often boring. Status is almost always shiny. But only one of them makes your life better. Here's the part that slips in quietly. When you start choosing utility over status, your world gets simpler. Not smaller, simpler. You stop chasing every trend. You stop buying things for people who aren't even thinking about you. You stop assuming happiness is hiding inside the next big purchase. Instead, you begin collecting things that feel like they belong in your life, not things that belong in a photo. And somewhere in that shift, something unexpected happens. You feel lighter. Your choices feel clearer. Your money starts working for you instead of working for your image. Utility asks, "Does this serve my life?" Status asks, "Does this serve my ego?" The moment you start answering the first question more than the second, everything, your home, your habits, your spending, begins to look less like a performance and more like a life that finally fits you. Chapter 8. Risk and Regret. There's a very specific feeling that shows up when you're about to take a financial risk. It sits somewhere between your chest and your stomach, a mix of excitement, fear, and a tiny whisper that asks, "Are you sure?" Most people think that feeling means something is wrong. But honestly, it just means you're human. I remember this guy I knew who was obsessed with avoiding mistakes. Every decision he made was wrapped in layers of overthinking. He'd spend weeks comparing prices, reading reviews, analyzing pros and cons of the smallest purchase. One time, he spent a full month deciding whether he should switch phone plans. A whole month. And after all that stress, he still felt unsure. That's the tricky part about risk. The uncertainty never fully goes away, even when you do everything right. But here's where it gets interesting. One day, he said something that hit like a quiet truth. He said, "All this effort to avoid regret, and somehow, I'm still not happy." That line stuck with me, because it's so easy to spend your life trying to dodge regret, only to end up regretting the way you avoided living. On the other side, I once talked to someone who made a big financial leap, the kind that keeps most people awake at night. She wasn't reckless. She just believed in something more than she feared the risk. When I asked if she was scared at the time, she said, "Of course, but the fear felt honest." I think that's the difference. Some fear holds you back. Some fear points you forward. We're raised to think regret comes from bad decisions. But regret also comes from the choices you never touched because you were scared of losing. And that kind, that silent kind, is heavier. There was a moment not long ago that really shifted how I saw all this. I caught myself avoiding an opportunity because I didn't feel ready. That lovely, dangerous word, ready. It's a trap because it makes you believe preparation is the cure for fear. But sometimes fear shows up not because you're unprepared, but because you're standing in front of something that matters. And when something matters, risk becomes part of the deal. It's almost ironic. We try to eliminate risk so we can feel safe, but half the things that make life meaningful require at least a little uncertainty. Relationships, careers, dreams, even simple upgrades that could make your life easier. Everything meaningful asks for a piece of courage. But regret is different. Regret waits. It shows up slowly, years later in the quiet moments. The ones when you look back and realize you played it too safe. You stayed small. You protected yourself from outcomes that never would have destroyed you anyway. I've learned something from watching people at both extremes, the reckless and the overly cautious. The people who tend to live the most balanced lives aren't the ones who avoid risk. They're the ones who take the risks that align with who they are. They choose chances that feel connected to their values, not their ego. They make decisions that might scare them, but don't betray them. And when those people look back, even if things didn't work out perfectly, they feel something lighter than regret. They feel proud that they tried, proud that they lived. Because in the end, life doesn't punish you for the risks you take as much as it punishes you for the courage you never use. Chapter 9. Quite compounding. There's this calm, almost invisible magic that happens when small choices stack up over time. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show off. It just keeps working in the background, building something steady while you're busy dealing with the noise of everyday life. That's the strange beauty of compounding. You never notice it when it starts, only when it's already changed you. I once knew someone who put a tiny amount of money into a savings account every month. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would impress anyone. Honestly, it looked pointless at first, but he kept doing it. Month after month, year after year. One day, he opened his account and realized he had enough to take a year off work if he wanted, and he wasn't even sure how it happened. That's the thing. The quiet stuff grows. The loud stuff fades. It's the same with habits, the same with relationships, the same with confidence, even the same with pain, the unprocessed kind that sneaks up on you years later because you kept brushing it aside. Compounding isn't just a financial idea, it's a life idea. There's a woman I know who started walking every morning for 10 minutes. Just 10. She didn't call it a routine. She didn't try to turn it into a fitness story. She just walked. A year later, she was walking an hour without even thinking about it. Not because someone told her to. Not because she made it a big resolution. It just grew. Quietly. Steadily. Like it was always meant to. Money works the same way. But we want fireworks. We want results that show up fast and prove we're doing something right. And when we don't get that, we assume we're failing. But here's the thing nobody really teaches you. Most of the important progress in your life will never feel like progress while it's happening. It feels boring. It feels insignificant. It feels slow. But slow isn't wrong. Slow is the truth. There's a moment I think about a lot, a conversation with someone who believed they were terrible with money. They said, "I'm trying, but nothing changes." And I asked them to look at where they were 6 months earlier. They were saving a little, paying off a little, thinking about money with more clarity. But because it didn't feel dramatic, they dismissed it. That's the trap. We expect growth to be noticeable, but real growth is patient. Compounding whispers. It doesn't shout. It's in the $20 you don't spend on something meaningless. It's in the late-night online cart you close instead of checkout. It's in the coffee you make at home because you're trying to break a habit. It's in reading 3 pages a day instead of 0. It's in the conversations you have with yourself where you finally ask, what do I really want? Even emotional stability compounds. A small boundary today becomes a bigger peace tomorrow. A small moment of courage today becomes a stronger version of you a year from now. There's something deeply comforting in knowing that you don't have to overhaul your life to change it. You just have to choose one thing, one small thing, and keep choosing it. And here's the twist that feels almost unfair. The people who look like they made giant leaps usually just made tiny steps consistently. When you understand that, money stops feeling like a race. It becomes something gentler, something manageable, something you can shape without punishing yourself. Quiet compounding doesn't celebrate you. It doesn't cheer you on. It doesn't give you quick wins. It just builds the life you'll thank yourself for later. Chapter 10. Wealth without independence is a unique form of poverty. There's this moment in adulthood when you realize something unsettling about money. It sneaks up on you slowly, in the middle of a random afternoon, when you're doing something ordinary, paying a bill, sitting in traffic, staring at an email you don't want to answer. The realization is simple but heavy. Having money doesn't mean you're free, not even close. I learned this from someone who looked financially set. Big salary, beautiful home, all the lifestyle markers you're taught to chase. But every morning he woke up with this tightness in his chest, like he was running a race he never signed up for. One night, we were talking, and he said something that shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. "I have everything," he said, "except the ability to breathe." The way he said it, like he wasn't talking about air. He was talking about permission. Permission to slow down, permission to say no, permission to choose. That's when it hit me. Money can buy comfort, but independence? That comes from something deeper. I knew another person who lived on far less, but moved through life like she owned every inch of her time. She worked remotely from a tiny apartment she loved, traveled when she wanted, woke up when her body felt ready. She wasn't rich by any traditional measure, but she was free in a way most people never get to be. And that contrast, it stays with you, because you start noticing how many people live trapped inside lives they paid for. The car that locks them into years of payments, the house that quietly dictates every decision, the job that drains them but pays too well to leave, the lifestyle that forces them to keep upgrading because the old version doesn't match the image anymore. It's a strange kind of poverty, the kind where you have money but no space to make choices. There's this memory that keeps replaying in my head. I was sitting across from someone who finally paid off a long chain of debts. Nothing dramatic, no champagne moment, just a quiet evening and a deep exhale. And he said, "It's weird. I thought I wanted money, but what I really wanted was margin." That line settled into the air like truth. Because margin, that breathing room, that buffer, that ability to choose differently, that's independence. And it's worth more than any shiny thing you can buy. Sometimes independence looks small. Saying no without fear, taking a day off without guilt, leaving a situation that doesn't feel right, walking away from a job that drains you, choosing a slower life even when faster looks more impressive. Independence is the ability to steer your own story. Wealth is just the fuel. But without the steering wheel, you're just a passenger in a very expensive car. At some point, you realize real wealth has nothing to do with how impressive your life looks. It's about how honest your life feels when no one is watching. It's about whether you can choose rest over hustle, meaning over status, yourself over approval. Because the truth is quiet but undeniable. If your money controls you more than you control your time, you're not wealthy, you're just decorated. Independence is the part of wealth that can't be seen, but once you feel it, everything else fades in comparison.